Welcome back to the X podcast, where we like to take the most current events and the most riveting ideas and deconstruct them.
Are you trying to create a new intro right now?
I don't know. You know, sometimes it's like Michael Scott. It's called improvisation. You begin a sentence and you just trust where it leads.
You do sound a lot like Michael Scott often.
That's not true.
Okay, let's do something fun.
Okay.
Okay, so give me like your top maybe new song you've been listening to recently.
This is gonna sound okay. There's one called Eras by Fletcher.
Okay.
Oh, I thought this was a Taylor Swift thing.
What's it about?
Eras.
Or like which genre of music?
It'd be kind of indie pop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What about you?
My wife's been listening to the new Taylor Swift album.
I mean, honestly, I'm gonna be honest. I have to say, I really like it.
It's awful.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It is her worst by far.
Okay, this comes from the person who doesn't listen to music, though. So
I don't
can
care.
We really
it's her
like...
worst. I've listened to all of her stuff. It's terrible.
That is a very hot take.
You know what? It's really not that hot. That is actually more of a popular opinion this time around.
There's a lot of musicians and a lot of fans that don't like it.
No, there are a lot of her own fans that don't like it.
I've not heard anyone talk about them not liking it.
Oh, yeah, there are. They've been talking about this on the radio and different things. What's fascinating...
Almost every article is giving it like a great review.
No.
And everybody know who actually listens to her music likes it. Even people that don't usually like her are like, oh, this album's awesome.
I've talked to several Swifties who say it's not great.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm serious. And, like, my wife likes Taylor Swift.
There's a couple on the album that I like.
And we were listening to it. She was playing it the other day in the car. And I swear, we were 3 or 4 songs in, and I said, are you going to change the song? And she said, I did. I said, they all sound the same. And she goes, you're right, they do. All of her songs sound the same. It's awful. I'm over the drum machine and your stupid, boring beats for all this stuff. She is a great poet. She should just write a book of poetry. Save us, spare us all from the
music,
awful, droning music that has no artistic flavor to it, no musicianship behind it. It's boring.
So you hate Taylor Swift?
I don't hate Taylor Swift. I think I'm going to say this is a hot take. Are we doing a hot take episode?
I think she is. So. Tell me how you really feel.
I think as a musician, if you're going to put her in that category, she's massively overrated. As a singer, she is massively overrated. Her range is this big. Like if you were to put her next to, like, let's say Tori Kelly, like anybody that has a voice. Now, I think she is a cultural phenomenon. I think she has captured people. She does her lyrics.
Her marketing is crazy.
Her marketing, everything. It is like she has struck iron, and she is the biggest female in the world of just known popularity, wealth, all of that. I'm not discrediting that. I'm saying purely from a music standpoint, her music,
you can do better.
It's bad. It's not. And she runs.
I will simply say,
she ran the top 14 songs on the charts.
I will simply say, in rebuttal to that all that you talk about of her being powerful has come from her music. She's not an actress. She is a musician.
No.
And she's the only musician who has single-handedly impacted the U.S. economy. So I just think that speaks for itself.
You think in a good way? I think in a bad way.
Okay.
How can more money in our economy be bad?
Okay.
I'm talking about how much money she's taken from our economy.
Okay.
Has moved into her pockets. It's actually the young people. It's a transfer
now you
of
sound
wealth.
Like a socialist.
It's a transfer of wealth.
Now you
It has
sound like a
gone from
socialist.
the young people to the old. He knows what I'm talking about.
I
That's Scott Galloway.
I know exactly what
This
you're
is
talking about.
exactly what I'm talking about. Perfect setup for where we're going to talk about
What
today.
do you think about the new Taylor Swift album?
It's definitely not. I don't like it as much as the previous one or a couple of other ones. There's some songs on it. I think you and I were talking about some songs that I liked, but I don't.
I like her old
a
albums.
majority of it, I'm like
1989, Speechless, Red.
So okay, like the whole thing of like them sounding the same. Like what was the Folklore album that came out in 2020?
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, to be honest, that's when I really started liking her because I feel like she really came into her own as like a songwriter, and it became very poetic. I love the lyrics, but in all reality, a lot of the songs did sound kind of similar. So I feel like for the last 3 or 4 albums, that's been kind of on brand. To me, it's not bothered me as much. These last 2 albums, I don't love every song on it. I think I told you there are like 4 songs in the new album I love, and then 4 I think are pretty good, and the rest I'm like, it's okay.
Out of the 31.
Mm-hmm.
8 out of 31.
There's a reason why it's called Tortured Poets. She's a poet, and we're tortured. Oh my gosh, sorry.
So we're gonna get
Swiftie,
are
sorry.
we gonna get your take on the Kendrick beef or Kendrick Drake?
That's
drama?
I don't follow that, but
Hunter.
son-in-law does. That's
He
for
knows
sure.
all-
No. Here's the thing when it comes to Kendrick and Drake is the only acceptable arena for you to act like a 5-year-old is in the rap industry, and then people think it's cool.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got nothing to say.
Mic drop. Transfer of wealth.
Yeah. There's a massive transfer of wealth happening from the young generation
To
who are going to
Taylor
Taylor
Swift's
Swift's pocket.
Dude, it's so expensive.
That's what's
to go.
happening.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Oh wait, sorry. That was the setup?
Oh, that was the setup.
That was the setup. That was the segue.
Speaking of Scott Galloway.
Beautiful segue, by the way. I just want to.
Yes.
We just. Oh man, this is fun.
There is a very influential, he's a professor at NYU, and a colleague of Jonathan Haidt. We've talked, ad nauseum on this podcast about Calling the American Mind, several books that really just honestly diagnose some of the pathways that got us here as a society when it comes to polarization, when it comes to echo chambers, when it comes to our political radicalization. Fragility, our digital susceptibility, our increased age of anxiety. And one of the colleagues of the author that wrote that book is a guy named Scott Galloway, who now it just seems to be everywhere. He pops up everywhere, and he was recently a guest on one of the podcasts we listened to. Carrie Newhoff, you listened to it, really highly recommended it to me and PT. And then I finally listened and was like, oh my gosh, this was so good. And then the whole time I was in Switzerland, his TED Talk kept popping up on my YouTube algorithm called The U.S. is Destroying Young People.
Great TED Talk, by the way.
Yeah.
It has a little bit of vulgarity, but incredible TED Talk.
Incredible. I mean, he just goes for it. And listened to that one this afternoon. I thought it was incredible. So anyways, there's a whole lot of starting points, but I know you said you took a lot of screenshots because he really – it's funny. I think at the very beginning of it, he's like, I have 44
screenshots and slides in 720 seconds.
Yeah, he said, so I'm going to go ahead and light the candle. And then he just goes for it. It's like 18 minutes.
Yeah.
But if you can, like you said, it's got some vulgarity, but not really vulgarity, just profanity.
Yeah.
But just a fascinating read into where we are as a society.
Yeah.
Fascinating read. And it's weird because he really just paints a really bleak picture. And yet, in a weird way, as brutal as he eviscerates the problem, he has solutions.
Yeah.
And he's almost an optimist in the sense that he says, and the hardest part, like, we can do.
We've solved this.
We've already figured it out.
So what are some of the things stood out to you?
Okay, the big overarching theme that I think, man, we need. Here's what drives me nuts. We have voices like him, Jonathan Haidt, other ones, who have just incredible, like his more than what I've heard in the past of people with solutions, ideas. And yet these are the people that will never run for office. They will never end up in our political system. Instead, we get the same old heads parroting the same stupid policies that aren't actually fixing anything. Everybody's patching stuff. No one's fixing anything. So this is part of what I think he speaks to. And he asked this question at the beginning, do we love our children? Because what we've seen over the last, I would say, 30 years really indicates that we don't love our children. And I think probably the biggest argument that he makes. Now, Grant, none of this is, I think, deeply philosophical. None of this is theological. He's an atheist. He's a professor at NYU. He's speaking practically when it comes to prosperity and how we are positioning the next generation to succeed.
Come up, yeah.
And he says just some fascinating. I'll just give a few fascinating stats, and we can jump off or just pause and talk about them. Right? He says that he is at his age. I don't know how old he is. Do you guys know? You know, he's probably late 50s.
I'll look it up. Late 50s,
maybe late 50s. He basically says that he lived in a time when he was given opportunity that people today don't have. For example, he talks about higher education. You know, he said he was like, I should have never, according to today's stats, I would never have a chance to get into top universities in our country. He said, the average admission rate at top schools when he went to school at UCLA in 1987 was 27%. That was the average admission rate. So 27% of people that applied got into UCLA. In 2022, it's 6%. So these institutions, which maybe you could say, I think we're seeing a shift a little bit. You could say control the financial market, so to speak. In other words, if the highest paying jobs are given to people with the highest education and maybe the best education, they're getting harder and harder to get into. College debt as a first-year income in 1987 was 31%. In 2022, it's 53%. So he talked quite a bit about the increase of tuition since 1987. It's just massive, massive. House price to your first year's income has more than doubled. And so he basically is, instead of just pointing out the facts that he goes through, he does end up providing some solutions that we need to change.
Yep.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, the whole hypothesis of his talk was that there's been a breach of contract. And he hypothesized and said, we've broken the social contract that binds America. Work hard, play by the rules, and you'll be better off than your parents were.
Yeah.
For the first time in our nation's history, this is no longer true.
No. In fact, for the first time, I think, in our nation's history, one of the things he said was, your parents at 30 were better off financially than your generation is today. The Gen Z generation, or the ones that turn 30 now.
Which, by the way, I feel that.
Yeah, so your parents at 30 were doing better financially than you are.
They had access to the let me say it this way. And I'll just bring in some of my own personal story. I didn't own my first home until I was past the age of 30.
Yeah.
Most of my parents or my parents' generation owned their first home way earlier.
Yeah.
I would say early 20s.
Well, okay, I'll give you a reason for that. He puts about how it's become out of reach. Okay, so this is fascinating. The median monthly mortgage before COVID, February of 2019, so the year before COVID, was $1,102. That's how much the mortgage payment was before COVID in our country. That was the median home price, okay? The median monthly mortgage now, February of 2024, $2,310. More than double. So in a matter of 5 years, we're not talking about a long span. We're not talking about multiple generations. We're talking about 5 years. The average price to pay for a house in America has doubled. That's insane.
That's
now,
crazy.
at the same time, you add, again, these are some facts and stuff that he's got to. At the same time, he was on there, U.S. federal minimum wage is not keeping up. The minimum wage, if adjusted for productivity, based against our GDP and all kinds of other things, from 1948 to 2021, I mean, it has not changed much. From like 1950s, it was minimum wage was somewhere around, according to this chart, $7. It's $9.50 now.
Yeah, that's not that
That's
much.
since 1950s. In 70 years. I think we can just look at the last 5 years and see how much inflation has increased. Like you in 5 years.
Yeah.
We know how expensive it is to buy groceries. We know how expensive it is to go out to eat. We know how expensive
Much
it is to
less
buy a
70
house.
years.
Less 70 years. And he said if it had followed the trend of productivity, that our federal, like our minimum wage right now should be $22.14. Minimum wage. In other words, you can't keep up when everything in our country is inflated in cost.
Yeah.
The housing market, everything else, but you're not paying people, and then you can't get into colleges or universities, and if you do, the amount of school debt you have is outrageous.
Yeah.
Like, I think one of the things that again, he's got tons of stats, and there's some other things that we can talk about. I think one of the things that this has given me a little bit of an appreciation for that I don't know that I necessarily had, probably in the last year or so, is to realize how challenging it is for my kids' generation to really succeed. Like I don't think I was aware.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, well, we all have kind of plotted our way through life and course. And he's kind of showing, and there's other people that have shown some statistics that would say, no, it's way harder now than it's ever been. And so what's that going to do? It's just going to continue to press down the younger generation. And so the big argument was what we have holistically is a system, whether intentional, probably intentional, without maybe it being really stated.
Yeah.
But we have a system where the transfer of wealth is actually currently going from young to old, not what you would think in a normal society, generation over generation, which is a transfer from old to young. And so right now, you are better off in this country if you're 70 than if you're 30. You're financially better off. You're doing way better if you're that. And so I don't know. It gives me a little bit more empathy for the younger generation than I think I had before of how difficult it is for them to really maybe succeed financially here in America.
Yeah. And look, it's not like we're struggling or doing anything like that. So I don't want to claim that like we haven't made it, or we have a home, we have things that we want for our children where we can provide a future with them. But we're even debating like, okay, for example, like, okay, do we go on vacation this year? Do we not go on vacation? We have these things we want to do, and it's like, even as I look at our budget, simple things like being able to invest in stock market or different things, which is where, like, let's be honest, like if you invested in the stock market 20 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever, like you were getting an incredible return for your money. And that's where, through investments and different things, that's where you really see a growth in wealth.
Yeah.
I just wasn't able to start that until a little bit later in life because any extra money or resources I had was going towards paying off college debt, for example, or paying off a high interest car loan, or paying off increased price of groceries and living and different things like that. And look, it's not, there's no malice or anger or frustration there. That's just part of life. And I'm going to take ownership. There's decisions that we made that if I could go back, I would change those decisions that would have made it easier on myself at the time. I've talked about that a lot on this podcast. But some of the things that he's speaking to, I have seen and felt, and I know it's even more acute in the generation underneath me.
Yeah.
So,
have you noticed it? What's your take? Before
100%.
I share some more things, but what's your take
No,
on?
I mean, one of the things that's really interesting, and maybe this is my ignorance, is he said this is the first time in history that this has happened where you're not better off than your parents were, which is really an interesting thought because a lot of the times from the other side, from the Dave Ramseys of the world, what you hear is, our generation or our younger generation is not content. We want the same things that our parents had at a different age. And he's saying, well, no, that's all. And in some ways, he's saying, no, this way it's always been and should be. That as society grows, as income grows, that there should be continued progress to where you're able to do that. So that was an interesting, kind of paradigm shift check for me.
I think I wonder about, okay, Dave Ramsey, you brought him up, right?
Yep.
Dave Ramsey is worth a massive amount of money. $600 to $700 million.
Yeah.
That's what he's worth now. He tells people what he's worth, working toward $1 billion. I think what I find fascinating about Professor Galloway is that here is somebody who understands that he, quote unquote, hit the lottery based on his time window of when he lived.
Yep.
Like he was like, he came from an immigrant single mother home. He said Pell Grants, everything. I got access into universities. I got accepted to Berkeley when I had a 2.2
GPA.
something GPA. He was like, you never happen. You're never getting into Berkeley. But he was able to go to business school. He was able to do things, and that's what universities existed for. Today, they are big business. They are breaking the backs. I mean, the cost of tuition, which, again, you could say it's optional, but when we build an entire economic structure that rewards those who have higher education and has repeatedly done that for 30, 40 years. I mean, it's been the major push. I remember when I graduated from high school that it was
college.
It was kind of like 50-50. Who's going to college? Who's doing something else? Today it's 90 8%. I think we're going to see a change. I think you're going to see the trades and other things because those things are actually increasing in cost and value faster than anything else because of the depletion of the workforce and things like that. And so you have this like there is what did he describe it? Well, I can't say how he described it, but like these universities are basically hedge funds. Like he gave a great example. I'll pull this one up. Harvard. Like this was interesting. And again, he intentionally like picked on Harvard, okay? And he was talking about this idea of, we talk about higher education and he's talking about himself and their career, their colleagues. He's like, we're professors. We're supposed to be public servants. But what's going on in these institutions, like Harvard, for example, long history, right? He said since 1986, he keeps going back to, and why is he, it's not just picking numbers out. This was when he went into college. Right, 1986, 87 years. So 1986 to 2023, Harvard's endowment has increased by 435%. So their endowment, what the funds that they have available to do the things that they do, has increased. Their enrollment from 1986 to 2023 has increased by 4%. He looks at that and he says, you're not a higher institution that is helping this. You're a hedge fund that teaches classes. And he basically says institutions like that should lose their tax-free status.
Yeah.
You're a big business. It is true. I'm telling you because I see my youngest daughters at school, and it is just the inflation of cost for education is out of control. It's out of control.
Yeah.
And so that aids to putting the younger generation who is trying to, whether it is pursue certain careers, and we want them. We need doctors. We need nurses. We need people in these fields, scientists. We need people, astrophysicists. We need people for NASA. We need people, like, these are fields that we need, even engineering. We need fields for all this, for our continued growth as in our GDP to grow, and yet we're making it so that when you get out of school that you have so much debt. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And then you add increased costs for houses. You haven't kept up with pay. And who's benefiting in all this? Who's really benefiting in all this?
Top 1%.
Top 1%, and I would also say the top
Government.
age.
Top age.
Yeah.
The top age. And so one of the things, without going to tons more data, and there's a lot of them, and he talks about some fixes, we can throw out some of the ideas he had. Because I love that he is like just going for the jugular and going, no, we know how to fix this.
Yeah.
We just won't. And why? It's because who's in control? I wish we could look up, maybe one of you guys can look up while we're on here. I don't know if it shows up. What is the average age of a congressman?
We can look it up, but it's interesting. This is a quote from his TED Talk. He said, the incumbents will throw their arms up like an 8-year-old who refuses to take responsibility. The plea of complexity is an illusion. Every problem we have levied on young people can be addressed.
Yeah. We just act like we don't have solutions.
He
right?
said there's programs all over the world
Yeah.
that can address most of the things that we're
And
talking
they
about.
do in other nations.
Yep.
We just choose not to. Why?
Yep.
Okay, the average age of members of the House at the beginning of the 117th Congress was 58.4 years. Of senators, House of Congress was 58, senators 64.3. So the average age of your congressman then, based on that, would be about 62 years old.
Well, let's not talk about the fact that we have the two oldest
Presidential
presidential
candidates ever.
candidates running for office this year. And you look at the current Senate minority leader, the Senate leader from Kentucky.
Oh,
What's
I
his
know
name?
about Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell. He's getting up there in age. Chuck Schumer, who is the majority leader. He is getting up there in
Nancy
age.
Pelosi was
She's
before she's at
84.
80 something. She just retired, right?
He in his TED Talk, he gave a fascinating stat about Nancy Pelosi. She was when her first child was born. It was when Fidel Castro was rising to power in Cuba.
Yeah.
And TV was still in black and white.
Yeah, TV
And
was
he
still black and white.
And
Think
so
about that. These are the people who are running our country today.
And so how do they have the capacity to understand the challenges that is facing young people?
Well, and I don't know if they would, because this is the sad thing, right? This is, I think, what all of us loathe about government, is that it feels like you have people in power who want to keep power, who want to keep control of what gives power, money, and they're dominant, and they're the ones that are making all the laws. And so he gives a great example. This is a fantastic example, right? He talks about what happened in the last infrastructure bill. They could not agree on $11 billion to expand the child tax credit.
Which, for those of you who don't remember, that was where you got you could opt into additional payments monthly. I believe it's $600 a month that you would get, and I don't know if it was per child or maybe it was like $200 per child. It was, for us, it added up to an extra $600 a month that you could get, and then on top of getting your normal regular tax credit.
So
yes.
again, I'm sure it falls because ideas of like, okay, we're just giving money to people. I get right that. But his point was it was $11 billion that would be added to this that would help who has the young kids, right? It's the 20-year-olds, young 30-year-olds, right?
Yes.
They're the ones that are struggling to, I can't afford to buy a house. They're the ones that are living under the massive school debt. They're all these things, right? Low wages that haven't kept up with productivity, things like that. Meanwhile, the same Congress passed the Social Security increase, cost of living adjustment of 9% without any problem that costs $135 billion. So he's kind of contrasting that we have Social Security increase, which again, we understand. I understand that you have cost of living has gone way up. And if you're a fixed income Social Security, it's probably been hard to keep up with it. I get that. But his point is, because he's talking primarily kind of about his age and that, he's like, but we also have statistically showing right now that the wealthiest people in our world are the ones who can draw Social Security. Many of them don't need it, but we're increasing that to do that, but we won't help. So he was just highlighting some of the differences of policies and who's controlling that. Well, who primarily goes to the voting polls? It's older generation, traditionally. Who's sitting in Congress and older people that are running the country. So they're naturally leaning toward policies and things that favor them. That's kind of his point. And he's even talking like that. These are my, would you say colleagues or my age. And so what's fascinating, kind of refreshing, is to hear from somebody who is wealthy. I mean, he gets on the podcast and he told McCary Newhoff, he said, last year I paid $14 million in taxes. He's real transparent. He has a book on wealth. And he's almost saying, wait, this is crazy. What's interesting is that his tax rate was less than mine.
Well, that's because he gets most of his earnings and incomes through investments and stock and real estate and those types of things. And those things are taxed at different rates compared to those who
and so he
are
talks
earning their
about,
money through sweat equity.
Yeah, so he talks about that. He's like, why are we taxing the same what you're making on the stock market versus what somebody's making in real sweat equity on their job? Because the people who are making a lot of money, again, that's available for any of us if you have the capacity, if you have the room, if you have the ability the money to buy into it, then you do. But he's saying that's where the wealthy are getting wealthier, and they're getting taxed at a probably lower rate. And he was like, why are we, or even if it's the same, why are we getting taxed at the same rate as what you're getting taxed on wages? Now that's not necessarily one class or another, or so like he's not even proponent, I would say, of a flat tax. I think he's proponent of an adjustment, a variable tax based on, if you worked for that, you get taxed at this lower rate. If you made tax, or so it's maybe you'd say it's
real estate.
Well, I would say it's passive income, or you're making it on the stock market, you're going to get taxed at a higher rate.
Yes.
And so these are fascinating ideas, but it's just refreshing to hear someone who is a little bit older saying, "Wait, I don't need to," and he's actually become generous. Fascinating conversation on McCary Newhoff about generosity, and he's not a generous person, he would say, but he does believe in giving away at least 10% of your income, and his goal is he gives away more money, double than what he actually makes every year. Because he has found that there is that level threshold of happiness, and beyond that, you're not actually any happier. And so why am I continuing to pursue this instead of don't I care about my kids?
Okay, let me ask this question. Okay, because we've done a lot of stats. I mean, we just basically opened up a fire hydrant on people as they were listening. Okay, so talk me through. Do we agree with, or what do we think about this core principle that the older generation owes it to the next generation to set them up to be in a position that is better than what they were. Do we all agree with that? Does that make sense? Should that be the case? Do we agree with that premise that that's not happening here? What do you guys think?
I'll just say, and then I'm curious, you have thoughts. I think that there is something innate as a parent that you should want that. So I think that there is a personal propensity to want that.
Yep.
I don't think that we have created systems that facilitate that. And why? It's because I think greed is the greatest narrative in our country and maybe the greatest narrative in a capitalist society. And I think that there is that as long as we continue to live greedy all the way up until we die,
which is getting older and older,
which the age is going up, that knowing that they're in power to do it. So do I think we should? Yes. I guess I'd be curious how that plays out, because the challenging part to those kind of like blanket statements or blanket programs is that not everybody's affected the same in it, right? Mm-hmm. So you could be 45 years old, have kids, but you could be struggling in middle class or lower. Yeah. And so the question is, I should want my kids to do better, but it doesn't mean that you're also not struggling at 45 years old.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that question, because are you talking about personally, talking about systematically, on a personal level, like what do you say?
I was gonna say, I think I was asking the question more from systematically, like, should one generation want the next generation to do better, or do we owe it to the next generation to set them up to be in a better position, or is it more merit based? Let's just say it that way. Is it?
I think. Well, it's a very interesting when you bring in the merit, because there's always Barack Obama has this quote that my sister loves. That talks about when people start talking about the power of a meritocracy and people just need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And Barack Obama has this famous quote. He said, "It's really hard when you were born without bootstraps." And his whole point is there are some people that is really easy for some people to say, who are born with the family structures around them and the kind of mindsets around them and the kind of opportunities around them. Now, we can always, because my devil's advocate is I always want to point to the exceptions and the people who just came from nothing. So I'm always going to be a believer and a proponent and a cheerleader to the human spirit, that I don't care who you are, where you come from, what you went through, you have inside you the grit and the ability to become something great. Yeah. I believe that about every person. But I think functionally that can't be an excuse to not say, how do we create the most opportunity in a meritocracy for anybody and everybody to be able to rise up? And so it is an interesting, do I believe that everybody should want more for the Of course. I mean, even biblically, the Bible says a righteous person leaves a legacy for their children, their grandchildren. But even on a family unit, I mean, the worst kids are hedge fund kids. So there's always going to be that line between what does setting somebody up for success look like? I mean, I know this sounds more ethereal, but to me, the greatest setting somebody up for success is to impart values, is to impart work ethic, is to impart discipline, is to impart mindset, is to impart opportunities. What does that look like to also impart financial systems for them to be able to succeed? I'm not sure. That's, the hope is you have smart guys like Scott Galloway figuring that out.
Yeah.
I walked away thinking it has been a long time. And again, he doesn't come from a faith-based perspective, although it seems like there were really interesting quasi-spiritual conversations him and Carey Nieuwhof started mingling in. But just from a functional standpoint of all the problems of our nation, it's been a long time since I have heard someone that, in my mind, adequately not only assessed really succinctly here are the issues of society, but also came with a really, holistic, practical solution, and here's how we fix it. And I walked away thinking, okay, I love the brutal logic of how he described the issue. I love the optimism of how he said, here's how we can fix the issue. But even as an optimist, I walked away thinking, okay, but who the heck does that? And how in a society that is so complex And with so much bureaucratic red tape for anybody to even step towards the middle with political power, how does that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that
I don't know that it can.
not to change your question, but that was my big
No,
like.
that's good. Let me answer my own question, and then I want to talk about yours.
Is that why you asked it?
No.
Listen.
But to your point, I think it would be, when it comes to the meritocracy thing or all those things, one of the things I think about is how do we create a space for, going back to his story that he tells in the TED Talk about how he got into UCLA and how he had an opportunity to go to Berkeley. Like, I think it's just about how do we create those opportunities. I love what he said. It's like, how do you create a space for the 90% to have the chance to achieve some level of either financial independence or financial security, or to have a better life than their parents. Now, what does that look like? I mean, that can look like a lot of different things. It's interesting because I've been following him on social media actually for almost 2 years now. And he posted this TED Talk, and it was this idea of, because you mentioned the whole thing about hedge fund kids. No. And he talked about the foundation of economic security, and he says this. He said the cornerstone of financial security is boring. Savings, however much you make or however much you spend, there needs to be a delta between them, ideally a large delta, and this requires discipline and stoicism. Vacations are good things. Summer's almost here. Everyone's going to be posting pictures of their vacations. It doesn't mean you have to leave the country or the state to get a break from daily life. The more fancy your lifestyle becomes early on, the more upscale stuff you'll feel you need to do to keep experiencing new and exciting things. So I think he understands like there's a balance between the two, but just it's about how do you present the opportunity for everyone. And again, back to my story, how do I not have to graduate college with $60,000 of student loan debt, and compared to Dave Ramsey, for example, I'm not throwing Dave Ramsey under the butt. Or under the bus. Wow.
under the butt.
I don't know where that came from. I'm not throwing him under the bus, but he was able to work his minimum wage job and
Freudian slip.
And Freudian slip and pay off college. The question is
we lost it now.
Is our friend gonna recover?
No. Okay. To add to what you were saying about some solutions. Especially with school. This was a fascinating one. He basically said we should take the $1 billion that Biden, I think, has kind of
earmarked for debt forgiveness.
So this would not be giving. And he said, instead of making the 2/3 of the people that didn't go to college pay for this for the third that did, now the debt. So he said, I would take that $1 billion instead, and I would break it up and give it to the top third of public universities. That'd be 500 of them. Again, that'd be interesting to see. But he said how that would really shake out. He said, in exchange, I would require 3 things from those universities. They have to reduce tuition by 2% a year. Let's start going the other way with tuition and not keep inflating it for no reason. Not much reason. It just does not match what they're inflating to. Second, expand enrollment 6% per year.
Get more people.
So open up, lower your GPA, expand your enrollments, and then the third one was increase vocational programs to 20% of degrees granted. So that would be more of like the blue collar type of fields, welding, plumbing, electrical. Like 20% of your degrees should be in those fields. And what's fascinating about this, and he said what would happen if we did this over 10 years, he said it cuts the cost in half and it would double enrollment.
Wow.
That's what he said would happen. It would cut the cost in half and double enrollment. And one of the things that he said was, we act like this is so hard to figure out. He said that's exactly what it looked like in the 80s when I graduated college. That's what it looked like in the 80s and when he had access to a lot of things and lower, you know what I mean? So he's thinking about himself. How could I fix this so that go back to the way it was when I had access and opportunity? And I think the big thing with programs and how do you figure out all this stuff, and I think this is where people start screaming about, how do you make it fair and equality and all that good stuff. I think it's more about how do we create, like you said, how do we give opportunity? to everybody. And so his big thing is, even he goes into things like affirmative action. He goes into other things. He's like, I don't think we should be doing things based on color, based on this, I think it should be doing based on value of what you make or what you have.
Income, yeah, money.
So it's like jobs. I think he's even referring to opportunities to schools, things like that. How do we create more Pell Grant opportunities so that we don't have a generation that is drowning in debt, universities that are overinflated in cost, and they're way behind the 8 ball. And then you can't get a house. Then you can't. I mean, these are how you move. Because one of the things he attached to, and again, I know that we have our own, like, we would say that there's a spiritual component to this, but let's just remove that. This is coming from a guy who's coming up with ideas for our country. They're not faith-based or doing this. He says studies show that there is an income level to where people see an increase in happiness. That, low income, less happy, middle income, even less happy, but happier than lower. Like, there is some level that if you don't have a house and you don't have certain needs met and you don't have some,
you can't take your kids on a vacation.
You can't go on a vacation. There's stuff that it does limit general happiness, right? And so he says, but there's also a line where you see that it doesn't make even more than this. They found, in studies that aren't
It
happy.
used to be $75,000.
Yeah, I think it's more than that. And that's
I
probably
think now
per
it'd be able to be
single.
like 100
Easily.
Yeah.
And that might be for a single income. And his point, just I guess on that, was how do we give more people opportunity to get to that place,
to that number?
Yeah.
And I think what he's trying to say, again, he said it so eloquently and with all his data, is that I think we have to, and I think he's speaking to his generation and older, and saying we have to stop. We got to start creating systems that create opportunity for the younger generation, and stop just trying to create all the systems that favor us. Which is there's tax benefits. The wealthier you are, that all the policies are working in the favor if you're older and if you have more income. And again, I know. Let me just preface it. I know anybody listening to this, you might be older and really struggling financially. Like, it's not to say everybody who's older is doing better. This is a general studies of kind of where we are average in our country. And, he had ideas for Social Security. I don't know how that sits with me. I mean, he basically says that I basically think his point is that Social Security should be funded, but you don't necessarily guaranteed to draw on it unless you need it. So in other words, there'd be some financial level. In other words, if you've done, and I understand, if you've done really well financially through the rest of your life and your investments, and you've got $10 million in the bank and you're retiring at 70 years old and all this, and whatever your income, you don't need Social Security like a 70-year-old that literally has a small pension that was a teacher their whole life, maybe, you know what I mean, doesn't have a lot and is struggling to get by. And so he's basically, I think what he was proposing was that your ability to draw Social Security should have to do with your income, not will you paid into it. And again, some people aren't going to like that because that really flies in the face of capitalism and all that. But that's where he's challenging, and he's saying, but do we as a country care about the next generation?
Because of all the money that's going into it.
I mean, it really does make you think. It makes me more empathetic for the younger generation. I think about my daughters and getting started and them trying to get started in life. And I think we have thankfully, and they have made some decisions that I think are setting themselves up well at their age, which not getting into school debt by, my youngest daughter joined the military.
You've really guided your kids, really intentionally.
Yes.
And really well for them to be set up well.
That primarily is because that was our path and journey. I'd say my parents really did that well with me and my wife. And so I can look back now, 25 years later or so from that age, and I can see, by us not having a bunch of debt, by us not having car debts, by us not having credit card debts, by us not having school debt, we were able to slowly begin to build and earn, with whether it's buying a house and selling it and buying another one and building equity and things like that. We're not by far means like rich in that regard that we think of here in America, but we're doing fine. And it's really it's not been from stock market. Trust me, I'll lose more every time I put money myself in the stock market. I mean, I have regular retirement investments that are hopefully building. But it's not that kind of wealth. But we didn't suffer in the system. One, we benefited probably from the lower mortgage prices. I mean, when I look at them today, I'm literally looking at people who are 25 years younger than me going, you have to have the exact same mortgage that I have today just to buy a starter home. Literally, I know people, we have people on staff, we have other people that buying homes and their mortgage payment is at the same as mine or higher for a starter home. And I'm like, man, that would have been so, I couldn't imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, unless you're
You know.
wealthy or living out in the sticks, it is a pinch for a single income person
Yeah.
to get a home.
Yeah, you know, it's difficult. And so what we've created is an environment where both people have to work. And how's that affecting the kids, right? I'm not saying one shouldn't. It's not about guys.
We're
and
putting
girls and
phones
this,
in
that.
their hand.
But well, I'm just saying they're going to daycares.
Yep.
Cost of that's going. I mean, the cost of daycare is
Through the roof.
outrageous.
By the way,
right?
that's one of his solutions, by the way.
He did have a solution for it because it's so expensive. Like we don't have a world where a single income family almost can survive with the amount of student debt that they have, the mortgages that they have to if they want to get a house.
Yeah.
And they can't survive.
Yeah, his solution was universal pre-K. Now, the question is, where's that money coming from? And that's where some of the reforms in terms of like basically shifting money away from Social Security and or other things.
Well, some people would say, and we'll talk about this in other ones, we should shift money away that we're shipping off to other nations to take care of their conflicts and their problems when we have, problems here. And again, that's all relative of what we consider problems. And I know we're going to talk about that. And, we're talking about that in another episode. But
I don't know. Lots of fascinating stuff.
I don't know. Here's what we'd say. This was thought-provoking, challenging. And so I guess we would say maybe go listen to his YouTube. Or you can follow him on social media. I'm not advocating anything for him, what content. I don't even know. I just started following him, so I can't speak to that. But it was refreshing to have somebody call out what's going on systemically in our country when it comes to this wage gap and ability to grow and earn that wealth and to have some ideas.
Yeah. There are bright people who are seeing the problems clearly and having solutions they're offering. We just need to get them in power.
He had, I don't remember all of these, and so people can, if you follow him, I'm sure you'll see this, but he had some real specific thoughts on even if you're in government and you're in Congress. He's like, if you're in Congress, you should make like $1 to $2 million a year. I mean, it was a large pay increase in that regard. That I think if you're in the White House, the president, you should make $10 million. Like I think you got to remember, this guy is a professor at NYU. Who's paying $14 million in taxes, who has done really well. So from him, like he's probably going, I made way more than $10 million last year. I think the president of the United States should be the amount of responsibility you should make that. But then he thinks that there should be absolute caps on terms, that you should have to sign things that afterwards you got to go at least 5 years where you cannot make any money off of your position, because that's what a lot of them do. They get into Congress, they get power, they go and now they have all these lucrative deals. They got all these people come to say, hey, come help get these things passed. And there's all this. That whole thing needs to be reformed.
It's bad. It's really bad.
And how do we get people like him in office creating policies?
Yep.
It just kind of feels like it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Is another voice that's going to be like, that's cute. And we'll just keep going with the same thing till we run it in the ground.
Well, the future's bright.
Okay. I know. That sounded like it's
funny
very
because
optimistic.
I told you, listening to him describe our current arena and current terrain reminded me of what I felt when I heard Simon Sinek in 2015 describe the terrain of digital media instant effects. So I'm going to end by quoting Simon Sinek, who once said, I have an undying belief that the future is bright. And I would echo that.
Yeah.
I believe the future is bright. Don't know how and what all ways, but we'll get there somehow.
We'll figure it out some way. I have a feeling in our country.
Yeah,
Enough of these ideas, if they gain momentum, I think they'll eventually.
This is really fast. It's from him, because his where he really first started was in marketing and advertising.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how all the old advertising companies and all the old ways of doing things are all gone. He goes, it's all online now, and it's all about the product that you have. He said basically, he goes, not that you shouldn't spend advertising dollars or whatever, but if you're got a company that's spending millions of dollars in advertising, trying to advertise kind of a subpar product, eventually that company's going to lose money. He said if you got a great product, the power of online will spread that idea or that product around.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Because people talk about it. You get enough good ideas, enough people like this.
Yeah.
The power of how connected we are will spread it, hopefully to a point where we reach a tipping point and we see change.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it was this podcast or the last one, but we talked about power story. And I do believe, the future belongs to the person who tells the best story. And
I think if you almost just fixed the political system, like if we could just, I don't know how it works because the people in power probably wouldn't want those changes. But if you could fix the political, we've talked about different, I know he's got ideas and things where if you could just fix who is able to get into power, that it has to be like people with good ideas can't. I mean, one of the things that I heard him say on
Ranked
the Carrie
voting.
Newhoff one was range voting.
Ranked
voting, yeah.
Ranked
Ranked voting. He said they have it in Alaska.
They do have it in Alaska.
So it's not necessarily the most popular person wins.
Did you know that was in Alaska
No,
before?
I had no idea. It's fascinating. But it's not, so they, I don't know, you remember how to describe it. It was basically when a vote comes in, unless it is clearly by like 50% or more, then they take the top 2 or 3, and then it gets like recast in voting and other things like this. And he said what you end up with, what you have in Alaska, is more moderate, middle of the road people.
Yeah.
So it's not extremes.
Yep.
You don't have the extremists and the popular vote and this and that. It ends up being the way it works out that the people that are in the middle that actually can probably create policies. So I feel like if you could fix the political system, then it would leave room or make room for some of these ideas to move forward and change some things in our country.
Yeah.
But I just feel like until you fix the political system, and it is a power grab, and it's about who has the most money and who's in who's in whose pocket. Until you fix that, I don't know that we can fix it because a lot of this is policy and program.
Yep. Until then, as a non-religious person, he really advocates for religious programs
He said
as a grassroots solution to a lot of
and
things.
being generous
And being generous.
and
Yep.
giving way.
Yep.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Well, on a future podcast, we'll talk about how he's an atheist who believes in the tithe.
It
He
is.
really
It
does.
is. It's crazy.
That just grabbed my attention. It's like, whoa, this is crazy.
All right. Well, we'll bring this to a close. Scott Galloway, check out his podcast on Carrie Newhoff. It's a longer one. If you have the stomach for hard hitting with a few cuss words, check out his TED Talk on YouTube. Scott Galloway, How the U.S. is Destroying Young People. Provocative, fascinating stuff. And thanks for joining these conversations as always. Don't forget to write in, review, rate, and subscribe. Until next week, we will see you then. Hey guys, it's Russ. Thanks so much for listening. We really believe if we can get around tables instead of behind screens, if we can talk to each other instead of at each other, we can make the world better. To help us do that, here are a few things you can do to help. First, if you haven't yet, leave a review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe on YouTube. This helps more than you know. Also, if you have been impacted by the community out of which this podcast comes, that's X Church. Maybe you're local or you've been touched by the messages and impact across the country, even the world. I want to encourage you to support this work. A powerful life principle is to invest in the people and places that invest in you. And so I want to invite you to do that right now by going to thex.church/give. You can give a one-time small gift, a sacrificial gift, or even become a recurring partner. Together, let's keep elevating the conversation, thinking higher, loving deeper, and making the world better. Cheers.